Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by a very special guest indeed, an old friend of mine, an old colleague, old peer of mine from IGN, Destin Legarie. My friend, it's good to see you. You're not at IGN anymore, but it's good to see you and reminisce about those days and hear about your life these days. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to hear from you, Colin. And thanks for working with Micah to get this all scheduled.
Oh, it's all good. Yeah, we had this scheduled for a while. You and I talked. We have so much to talk about, but we discussed your new moves back late last year, and I wanted to get you on the show. I think I'll do your show at some point too. So I'm glad to finally have you here. How's life? How's everything going?
Things are going great. Yeah. Trying to get you booked in for your anniversary of Last Stand Media.
Nice.
You've done a lot with Last Stand, and I'm like impressed. It's an inspiration for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's start with the important stuff. How's being a dad? How are you doing? Like, you have two children?
Yeah, I have two boys.
Right.
They're 2 and 4. They're wonderful. Yesterday I was streaming, just talking about the news or whatever of the day. And, you know, it's a little different when you have kids because they threw a Frisbee. The little one got hit. So I had to pause the stream, like leave, go take care of the kids, you know, do dad stuff, and then come back. And then you're kind of off your game, right? So you're like, what was I talking about? Oh, yeah, Shuhei Yoshida with Colin, the interview. Great interview, by the way. I actually listened to it on a car ride I took recently, and I really liked yours especially.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I was saying on Sacred when we were reminiscing about it. I don't like my headroom here. There we go. I was saying because I listened to Greg's and I listened to MinMax's, and I was like, I think our interview is better than those, but it's because they got to get the preliminary shit out of the way, so I could go like 3 layers deeper, you know. So I appreciated that or whatever. And I appreciate the audience I'm not huge into interviewing people in the space that are at their different companies, especially because they're so media trained. Shuhei is so media trained. So I was originally like, eh. And then the audience was like, no, you should talk to him. He's out. And it ended up being really fruitful. So he's going to be back later in the year. It'll be really cool. I want to just talk to him, Destin, about random games. Like, now that we've really laid talk to me for 20 minutes about MAG. What was going on with that? Talk to me for 20 minutes about Taurus Trophy. So let's catch everyone up on you. You were at IGN for many years.
13 years.
13 years. It's incredible. So I was there full time for 7.5. And as a freelancer, I was there for 5 years and an intern before that.
We went to Japan together. It was like me, you, Keza. I think Greg was there. I remember Ransky was there because he was there for production with me. And we were, fighting like we always did to figure out, like, do we have the extra HDMIs and stuff like that. Mike and I are very good friends, though, as I'm sure people know.
Yeah, Mike is great. He's like 3 or 4 jobs beyond IGN now, right? I don't even know what he's doing anymore. But he's in Southern California, I think now.
He's in LA.
Yeah. So we could have crossed paths when I was there for 3 years, but that would have required me to leave my apartment, which never happened. So, so we had when you opted to leave IGN, I tweeted out, because I remember working with you really well, and I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. Like, you were the first person I had ever met that was truly multidisciplinarian. You were almost like the prototype of what this space would require, ultimately, but that we didn't really realize at the time. It's like, no, I'm a writer, I'm the video editor, and I'm this and I'm that, but you were all of it. And it was the archetype of the way things would ultimately be done. So I'll always remember that about working with you. The other thing I remember working about with you is that you actually cared. And a lot of people, as you know, don't. So I really appreciated that about you too. And I'm excited to hear about your independent journeys.
Yeah, I care about getting it right. And I care when I get it wrong and addressing like ways that I can improve. You can't go out and like fix everything because everyone's going to have their reaction to your content, but you can take the lessons from that and then move forward and learn about it being better. That's all you can really do when you make a mistake, right?
Absolutely. You used to work so much. You you were one of the drivers for me to like learn. I got to learn more. I can't just write. I got to learn how to edit. I need to learn how to record video and audio. I need to learn how to put the stuff together. And I do it very crudely, and then I hired other people to do it for me because I'm not very good at it. But I always appreciated that about you, because you were like a one man band, and it was really, really cool. And just looking back on it, it's like, damn, it's you. And I don't know if you worked there. Did you work at IGN when we had Andre Seegers on the staff? Do you know who that is?
I don't know about that. No.
Yeah, Andre was like a guide writer for a few years, and he ended up leaving. He went to GameSpot for a little while in like 2009, 2010, but he left in like 10 or 11 to start a YouTube channel. God, what the fuck is it called? I can't remember anymore. But because I don't think it's really going anymore. But it was like so early, and he did really well. Oh, Game Explain. That's what it was. Game Explain.
Okay.
And I was like, so you and him are both in my mind as like people that saw things and did things more multidisciplinary before the time came. So it's really, really interesting now that all this time has passed. But how's everything going? So you're out in the wild now.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that process. Like, what happened with IGN? Why did you want to leave or opt to leave? And what went into that decision for you?
Yeah, IGN was great. And I have very fond memories of my time there. A lot of people were looking for like, oh, what's he going to say? It's like, no, I had a pretty great time, 13 years, and I stayed, and I do miss the crew. I text them every once in a while, like they're doing ID at Xbox today. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I got to produce the first one of those that we did. I hope they're doing well. It looks like they're doing like 50 languages. And I'm just imagining what that would be from a production standpoint. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the year, I've thought about it a lot, honestly, like going out on my own. And I kind of just realized I'm not going to get a lot of chances to do that, to take a shot and just see what I could do independently. Mm-hmm. So I finally made the decision to make the leap, and it's going about how I expected. I think what I expected when I went independent was I need to prove to people that I can do this. And got the Phil Spencer interview, which was good. I have a few, I'm interviewing, I don't know when this is going to air, but I'll have an interview with Thomas Mahler that's going to air soon, the co-creator of Ori, and he does No Rest for the Wicked now. And I sat down with the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 crew, and that will be airing soon also. And I did an interview with Bucky from over at Pal World, and I'm really enjoying that format. Because there's no pressure on length. You don't have to like worry too much about production. And it's really nice to just sit down and talk with people about whatever's going on, and, get into just like what it takes to make their games spectacular. So I hope that answers your question, but I am happy and satisfied with where I'm at right now.
Yeah, that's great, man. I'm really thrilled for you. I'm looking at your background too. Like, I love your logo. You've had that logo forever, but
yeah,
you have
from Get Wrecked Labs.
You have good brand. Like, I like your branding, and I like your personality. I like you play on multiple consoles.
Yeah.
And you have a great deal of knowledge of the industry. That Thomas Mahler interview should be, or is it Mahler? Yeah, like, should be interesting because he seems so outspoken. So I'll be interested to check that out. He's been on my short list for a while, but I'm waiting for No Rest of the Wicked to come to PlayStation before, so it makes some sense. Because like, I reached out to I know Jeff Rubenstein, obviously, at Xbox.
Yeah,
he worked at PlayStation for many years, so I'm a good friend with him in the industry. And I reached out to him when Pentiment came to PlayStation to see if they would get Josh Sawyer onto Sacred Plus, and they weren't into it. Just because I loved that game. I thought that game was fucking sick. And so I'll look forward to watching those interviews. Bucky should be interesting too, because Pal World is so strange. I wonder if he'll talk about the lawsuit. Probably not.
But they can't, like, legally, because it's an ongoing matter. So I put that at the end. I'm like, and just so everybody knows, why I didn't ask about Nintendo. You can't talk about it because it's ongoing court case, right? He's like, yeah, I can't say anything. So that's just how those things go, unfortunately.
Indeed. Cool, man. So yeah, so you've structured this new independent life. I have to say, from my own perspective, I'm surprised you didn't do it earlier. You're one of the few. There were a few people at IGN when we left 10 years ago where I was like, these are the people that can do this. So it's like McCaffrey could do it. Although I think the window might have closed, and he's obviously very prolific at IGN still and very prolific with his Tesla podcast. So that's cool. You were one of the people that could definitely do it. And Damon. And
oh yeah.
And those are the only, I'm not trying to be mean because I don't know very many people there anymore, but those are the three that always came to mind for me where I'm like, these are the guys that will be next. And yet all of these years had passed and no one ever made the jump. What was it? How was IGN the last 10 years? How did it change? Like, to me, I'm like you, where I try to show it a great deal of deference and respect because of all the opportunities that IGN opened to me and the people there, Pear specifically, that I really love.
Yeah, Pear's great.
But it also seemed from the outside that it changed a great deal. I actually think that it got ideologically captured at some point. And I've talked to Pear about that a great deal behind the scenes. But was the IGN different? Was the IGN that you left last year very different than the IGN that I left in 2014?
Not for me specifically, because I just focused on doing good work. I don't really talk about any of the stuff going on in the world. I prefer to kind of focus on just gaming, like my takes on games. One of the last big projects I remember being really proud of was I got a sim wheel, and I compared Forza to Gran Turismo 7 about how it responded to the specific sim wheel, the Fanatec. And I would do physics tests and frame rate tests. And I did this big elaborate video. Initially, I had done like a graphics comparison where it was Forza versus Gran Turismo. And everybody said, you didn't do it right. Like, that car's not shiny enough. And like, the fans kind of got really into the nerdy stuff. But I mean, the point is that for me, it didn't change much. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that my colleagues were trying to do at IGN. And I think everybody there really does care about making good content. And, I can only talk about my personal experiences, but I've gotten stuff wrong when I was there, and I take those lessons to heart and I try and improve from them. So I don't necessarily... for me personally, it didn't change very much. It was just do your thing. That was sort of my marching orders. Like, I had the trust of the company. I had enough successes where, Pear just knew that I would try and figure something out that was interesting for the viewer, for the gaming community. And that was always what I had at my forefront of my goals, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, from the inside, I imagine it wouldn't have changed very much, because I remember I started freelancing in 2002.
Like, I worked with Sam and Mark. So
yeah, Sam, right, exactly. And Sam, I think, is still there. Mark,
yeah, I
talk to Mark pretty often still. He was at my wedding, and he's a major reason why I'm here.
Not that Mark, a different Mark.
Sorry. Oh, Mark. Wait, Mark Sam Medina. And Mark. Yeah. You're not talking about Mark Ryan.
No, Mark Ryan Sally is wonderful, though. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because when I hear Sam and Mark, I'm thinking about my old guides team.
No, he hired you, right? And I think he hired me.
Yeah. That was when Andre, that we were bringing up earlier, was on the team. I was like the third. And then Andre left. I got promoted. Then Sam got hired, Sam Claiborne. Mm-hmm. And Sam actually emailed me randomly in like 2008. And I forwarded the email to Mark. And that's how we ended up finding him. So yeah, when I always hear Sam and Mark, I'm always thinking of Sam Claiborne and Mark Ryan silly. Although Mark Ryan hasn't worked at IGN in many years at this point, but yeah. So
he's coding now. He's very smart.
Yeah, he works for Minds, I think. He's totally self-taught. He's a really amazing person, in my opinion. But that's for another. I have to have him on the show at some point too. That's another topic though entirely. So are you still in East Bay, right? That you lived in East Bay for a long time.
No, I'm in SoCal. I'm in by LA.
So when did that happen? I didn't know that.
When COVID hit, we all had to go remote. And at some point I'm like, hey, I don't want to stay in San Francisco. I have an opportunity to, live in a home like further away from the city. And I remember I spoke with Pear, and he was like, well, you should try and stay kind of close to the office so that you can still be involved with like the fun productions like E3 or such. And he made that recommendation. He didn't give me like a hard mandate or anything, but I was like, yeah, I don't want to move too far away. So I'm outside of LA, a significant distance, but I could always go in, and like I got to do Game of the Year watch, and every once in a while we would do like special unlocks there, and of course like Summer Games Fest and things like that. So yeah.
Oh, I did
COVID.
not know that. I missed that entire chapter. That's awesome. Congratulations. Yeah. I lived in Southern California for a few years before our time didn't cross over, but, okay. Very interesting. Yeah. And good. So you got yourself a house paying that reasonable California property tax. It's nice. Good for you, my friend.
Let's not talk about that.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. Geez.
That's why I left California was just, I live in Virginia. Yeah. I live in Virginia and it's expensive here, dude. We were walking around our neighborhood, and they have this. I don't know if I'm sure the signs are everywhere, but they're new houses, new buildings, and they'll say like from the 400s or from the 500s, and we've just watched these numbers go up, and now it says from the 600s, and I'm like, these are the same houses in the same place, right? Where we bought ours in the 300s. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? It's crazy. So yeah, I don't envy you being in California anymore. It was so much cheaper moving here, but to each their own. I had to get out of there personally for other reasons too, not just the money. Get away from a few shady situations that were bothering me as well. So what have you been playing? Let's talk about games a little bit. What's keeping you occupied these days?
Well, I just started the Mecha Break demo or beta or whatever. That game's pretty fun. And I have a sponsored piece coming from that. But I played that when I was at IGN and I really liked it. So when they reached out, I was like, yeah, sure. It's one of those situations. I know you don't do that, but yeah, I'm more open to it, especially if it's a game that I enjoyed. It's just kind of like, sure, I'll make a video about power-ups or whatever in the game. Yeah. I don't know how much you're allowed to talk about those things, but I like the game. I'm not being paid to say I like the game. I already did. So when they approached me, it was kind of a no-brainer,
Yeah, we don't take any endemic advertising, but we're also in an advantageous position where we really don't have to. So you kind of make lemons with that, or lemonade with the lemons, where it's like, yeah, we don't get necessarily the full amount of access, but we also don't need it. We don't get a lot of those offers anymore. Our ad people originally, I've been with the ad people that I've been with for 7 years now for Last Stand. It was annoying for them originally because I would turn down everything, but now they don't even offer that the endemic stuff anymore. Now it's just the non-endemic ads that are good. So yeah, to each their own. I just don't want to be.
Speaking of, this episode is brought to you by Manscaped.
I wish we still had the Manscaped ads. We don't have the Manscaped ads anymore because I used to love getting. One of the great things, and you probably know this from doing all the ads over the years, is like just the you get like the tchotchkes in the mail, and then I become fans of some of these. Like I legit become fans of these companies. The company I always think of is Mack Weldon, the sweatpants company. I live in Mack Weldon sweatpants, but they've not sponsored the show in like 5 years, but they've extracted all of this money. It's sort of a reverse advertisement where I pay them. But yeah, the ad market also is a little softer this year than it's been in a while.
Are you getting paid for that chair you ordered? Because you've talked about it on like 3 episodes now.
Oh, this one here, I think you're in one too, the Aeron chair from Herman Miller.
The Herman Miller, right?
Dude, it's so funny because I sat in it. These are the chairs we had at IGN, and I sat in it, and the sitting in it was nostalgic. There was like a nostalgia to the feeling of sitting in it. Well, I was like, oh man, this really is a great chair. No, not sponsored by them. They got a bunch of money out of me too. It's the reverse. It's what I'm telling you. It's the reverse ad. I pay them. So, all right. So what else are you playing? Are you playing anything on console?
No, mostly I play on PC, honestly. So like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, I'm really enjoying that game. And there was another one. I played a ton of Path of Exile 2. That was my last big assignment at IGN. It's got like 200 hours or some crazy amount of time. That game I really, really like. I think they're about to go full release soon, or at least add some other characters. So that's
people in my people keep getting Path of Exile and Pillars of Eternity confused for some reason in my neck of the woods. Neither are my style of game, but
I made a mistake when I went independent. Actually, just going off of that for a second. Sorry to interrupt you.
Please.
I took all the opportunities I could, and I got totally overwhelmed. So I have to realize that I'm one person, and like I have to write, edit, and script everything. So I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to take one game, and when that project's done, whenever it's done, I'll take the next one. Because Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, it's like, I think 70 hours to mainline it. It's like 200 to platinum it. So good luck with that one, Colin.
Yeah, I'm not playing those games. My wife's been playing it on Xbox, so I've been watching a great deal, but not for me.
Yeah. And then there's like a Avowed. I took that opportunity. I got 10 hours in. I'm still on like the main island, but like it all came at the same time, like early in Q1. And you can kind of noodle around with different things when you're at a company like IGN and there's a whole team like dedicated to making the guides and everything. But when it's just you and you're trying to get a review out the door, I definitely made a mistake because like I don't want to say no to anybody, but at the same time, now I'm just like, well, maybe I should have, because now I feel like I kind of let everybody down, you know? So like I said, lesson learned, and I think I'm going to focus in on just one project at a time and go that route from now on.
Yeah. What's your creation and publishing schedule look like as an independent creator? Do you have like a specific cadence of things you want to get out, or?
Yeah. So here's the plan. I reached out to the patrons and I'm just like, look, I took on too much. What do you really want me to focus on? And they said the interviews. So I'm like, all right, like that's easy enough. So I'll focus on the interviews. And now I'm lining up new interviews, and I just told you 2 that are recorded and ready to go. I send them off as a courtesy, just like, hey, if there's anything in here, like if you're going to get sued for it or something, let me know. And I'd be okay with taking it out. But so far that hasn't really been an issue. So I have 2 of those lined up, and then I have a few more. There's this guy Colin I'm interviewing in March, I think. So that should be good.
Good. That should be a really interesting interview.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Beyond that, though, people like that, and they like my news coverage. They like when I just talk about the news, and my approach to news is conversational. I've seen people like get super mad when I make mistakes in the news report that I'm reacting to and recording in like a semi-live setting, because I do it live to tape. I just kind of record it, and there was one where I infamously, like, I blanked on 343 Guilty Spark being the reference for 343 Studios when they rebranded to Halo Studios, and everybody like lost their mind about that. I've always thought 343 Guilty Spark was like an annoying character. I never really liked him. I was happy when like he died. So I was just like, because they call him slang terms like orb and the glowing thing, and then he kills like one of your favorite characters in Halo 3, spoiler warning. Anyway, never liked that character, and I blanked on it in a video. So yeah, but people want more of that. So goals do that. The last one I did was the PlayStation financials. PlayStation is doing really well.
Yes.
But there's this conversation right now, and you kind of dived into it in your Shuhei interview. To answer your question, I'm a little all over the place this morning.
No, it's all good.
My publishing cadence is ideally, I would do a news video every day. I would have an interview on Saturday, and then I would do a live stream on Sunday. That is where I want to get to. But like I said, I took on all these things, and then I kind of got tied up with stuff. So I do have to figure out how I can get back to that cadence. But that's the target. Right now, it's a few news videos a week, and I have interviews locked for this week and the following weeks. I subscribe to your Patreon, and I'm like, oh, I need to get it together because I'm getting like something every single day from you. Like, y'all, like, I don't mean to like give you a free ad here or anything, but for real, I just did it for the Shuhei thing. And I'm like, Colin is like every day giving me content from his Patreon, and your content's really interesting. Like, I remember just not only do I watch it regularly, it's just great to have on like monitor too while you're doing whatever, like playing a game. But it's constant. And you have the Xbox crew over there. I think it's Maddie, right? And
Maddie and Cog.
Cog's great.
Yeah, he is.
I think he's a great guy, and Maddie's great also. And that's great content. So I checked that out. I've been listening to a lot of Sacred Symbols to prepare for this, and it's definitely something where I look at what you're doing. I'm like, okay, you need to figure out the Patreon workflow a little bit better. So I hear you on it.
Well, yeah, no, I'm just curious because I totally relate to what you're saying. It reminds me when we left to do Kind of Funny. It's like you're anxious and you're nervous. You don't know if it's going to work or not. So everything that comes across your desk, every opportunity, every ability to play a game early, we did the same thing. And we had to, people will remember when we launched, we were doing Let's Plays every day and like and it's like, dude, we can't do this. So you find the cadence, and the audience, I think in this like micro community crowdfunding space really get the ebbs and flows of it. For instance, we totally busted our RSS feeds for a bunch of people on Patreon this past week by entering into an alpha that we thought everyone wanted and a lot of people hated. And it's like, that's just
furious.
that's just the cadence of knowing and not knowing and kind of going with your gut and then readjusting down the line. So I think that what you're describing sounds a lot like my old experience too. And the thing about the rapidity of our content is that like the only things we can really control is like quality and being timely. So if we can control those things and never miss, then people come to rely on it. I've said this many times to my own audience, but I think it's so funny. Like I see it every day on Twitter where it's like, can't stream today. Sorry guys, no podcast this week. See you next week. It's like, no, I'm going to eat your lunch, you know, like, cause we will be there. We were there over Christmas. We were there. Like Sacred Symbols has published every week since July 2018, every week. So, but I think that that's a great, like people just know you can rely on it. So when you get into that pocket, I think you'll also figure out what works best for you as you are now. And then people will come to rely on that too, you know? So, but we're also in a podcast space where the product like Sacred Symbols is happening regardless of what's happening. So it's got to be recorded at this time and published at this time. And whatever happens within that interim, that window is going to be in the show. Sometimes the shows are really light. Sometimes the shows are 5 hours long. So, and that's what I love about,
because I've been watching.
That's what I love about not working at IGN anymore is one of the things that always bothered me, and it bothers the fuck out of me when I listen to like news and stuff too, is like, all right, we've been going for an hour, gotta go. And it's kind of something you were talking about earlier about not letting things breathe, about having some sort of production cadence where I'm like, no, let's just hang out because it's a podcast. And by the way, the watch time and the view time is really valuable. It's way more valuable than views. So we have an average watch time on Sacred Symbols of like 50 minutes is fucking crazy, you know, on YouTube. And
I was looking at my analytics and
please go ahead.
I was looking at my analytics and I totally concur with what you're saying, because you look at it and you get a higher CTR, a higher retention rate. People stick around for long form shows. If you're having an interesting conversation, like if you're boring, then of course you're not going to stick around. But the shows that I do, I was looking, like we did a Michael Pachter episode where we just sort of talked about, and I did one with you about the FTC and like what it could mean for Microsoft, what it could mean for PlayStation. And people love that stuff. They just love talking about it. And what if this happens? What if that happens? And having a natural dialogue about it. They really stick around, and it really helps you get noticed in the YouTube algorithm, as I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah. And we confuse it sometimes. Like we're doing video essays again, which like no one really understands YouTube, as I'm sure like people study it. They think they figure it out. They know what works. Then something gets tweaked in the back end and it changes everything. So we just try to do the content that we want to do and hope that people find it. But I understand that it's never going to be like a 5-hour podcast every week is not going to ever be a mass market, thing, but that's okay. Because it's not for the mass market. It always fascinates me too how hardcore our space is. Like I think a lot about this with football, for instance, which I love, where this is like a national pastime and many tens of millions of people watch it every game and all of the rest. And then you have a game like Kingdom Come that's sold 2 million copies. We'll probably get up to 3, 4, 5 million as it's cheaper and time goes on. But it has a greater engagement level with people, even greater than these things that are absorbed by most people. Because like you said, I think people just like the conversation around games, even if they're not playing them, even if they're not in that ecosystem. I know I feel that way too. So we try to cater to that as best we can. So the FTC stuff. So what's when I had you last time. So that was 2022, I guess, is when you were on the show.
I don't know if I ever got on the show because like right now, just a little behind the scenes, I don't know why I can't connect to the program that you use.
Yeah.
So this time I'm like, I'm not letting it happen again. So I busted out an old laptop and I'm actually using my rig through the laptop. So hopefully it all works out. But yeah, you were on my program and we just talked about the FTC and what we thought would happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at my old emails. Yeah. They're from we had problems here. This was in April of 22. And then, I did your show. So what are your reflections on it? Like how do you look at the games space, the console game space, particularly today, comparable to when we last talked? How do you think it all panned out?
So much has changed, honestly. That's kind of a loaded question too, because if you want me to talk about from the Xbox perspective, I thought they would make those games exclusive when the announcement happened. we knew very quickly after they made that announcement that wasn't the case. So it was, and it makes sense too, because you would be shooting yourself in the foot if you just pulled Call of Duty off of PlayStation, for example, where like PlayStation has an install base of 75 million, and the numbers for Xbox Series X and S is anywhere. I put them around 30, 32 million, but I've seen as close to 36, but it's like half. It's half of what PlayStation is. So to lose that much potential sell through, especially when PlayStation players are so engaged, and it makes more sense that they decided to go the multi-platform strategy. I never would have guessed that they would start putting their own games on competing platforms. But when Satya Nadella hinted as much during the FTC trial, just saying, I don't like exclusives, like we want to get rid of them, I think he was tilting his hat a little bit. And now that I've been covering Microsoft for like 4 years, I think they do that every once in a while. Phil Spencer tilted his hat about releasing a handheld device not that long ago, and he confirmed to Bloomberg shortly after, like several months later, that, oh yeah, it's in development. And now Jez Corden over at Windows Central, I think he just had Jez on recently, said that they actually have a prototype ready to go. So they're pretty open. Like if you know how to read the room, so to speak, with the way Microsoft talks, they will often tell you what they're going to do. Never in my life would I have thought, oh yeah, there's rumors about Halo coming to PlayStation and that could be a reality. But I do think that Xbox fans should buckle up, because I think more stuff is coming. Once Indy came, I was like, it's done, because we had the transcripts from the FTC trial about how Indiana Jones, they went to the company that makes the movie and they said, we're going to make it exclusive, and they had it on lock, and then it just came to PlayStation anyway, which I think is, honestly, I think it's actually good that more people are able to play these games, and in a perfect world, all games would be available everywhere. So I'm kind of happy about it, believe it or not, or at least indifferent about it. PlayStation players get to pay full price and play the game. Great. Xbox players get it on Game Pass. And in a way, I think that's what Spencer always talked about. Game Pass, games where Game Pass, it's about getting exclusives where Game Pass exists. Now, they never got Game Pass on PlayStation. They never got it on Nintendo. Maybe they will someday, but right now that's not the case. And we'll see what happens in the future. Right now, it's just, well, you can pay $70 and Game Pass players can pay their monthly fee to pay the games.
Yeah.
Play the games.
It's interesting, Destin, because I did it. When I revived my video essay series SideQuest recently, one of the videos is about what I think, like what I call the Xbox's Icarus moment, which was the acquisition of Activision, where I feel like if you, and I'm not saying you, but the royal you, care about Xbox's long-term health as a console brand, then buying Activision was maybe the biggest mistake that they actually ever made, because they just spent too much money. And you can't, as you were saying, it's not even about Xbox's poor sales in quotes, because I think if Xbox was selling twice as well as it is now, it would still be a problem, like where they would still not be able to make the money back. Too many resources. You can't absorb Call of Duty's production costs and marketing costs and then sell it on Xbox or put it in Game Pass. Not at 30 million subscribers. You might be able to do that at 80 million subscribers, but they never got anywhere close to those numbers. And so I find it ironic in some sense that it all went the way it did, because I think if they stopped at Bethesda and then maybe did one or two more surgical, smaller acquisitions like Sega or WB or one of the other things that they were actually interested in, I think it would have gone differently. And I think you might have gotten these exclusives, because that's the fucked up thing. If I'm an Xbox fan, I'm looking, and my wife's a fucking huge Xbox fan. You look at it and you're like, damn, the games are finally here. But we can't afford to keep them on our console anymore. It took too long and we spent too much money. Now people on PlayStation and Switch will get them as well. I find it fucking crazy personally, because you might remember, we never wrote about it, but we talked about it on Podcast Beyond back in the day, is that I know someone in the room at Microsoft in 2014 talking about bringing Master Chief Collection to PS4. And that was just like a what if we did this? And I think it was a prelude to one of the big Halo releases. It might have been Halo 5 at the time, or no, I guess it would have been past that. Oh, something like that. And I was like, yeah, that sounds crazy. And of course, we've talked about it on our show many times. And you might remember that Matt Casamassina and Bozon had Halo on DS back in the day. Like they were real. People thought they were like these bootleg. I'm like, no, those are real. And so it's funny. And you go back even further. You go back to Konami publishing Age of Empires 2 on PS2 during the Xbox era, but never bringing it to Xbox. Very strange shit. So they've always been open to licensing and to spread shot effects. That's since the 70s when they were in Albuquerque. Microsoft was making software for everybody. So I think they're kind of where they want to be, to your point about Satya saying like that's not really in their heritage. He's been working there since the 80s. He knows what Microsoft's all about. But at the same time, I find it so, if I were an Xbox fan, I'd be very distressed about it just from the fact of like, damn, we actually do have a pretty nice catalog now, but we can't contain it, and
why distressed? Like, why would you worry about that?
Well, because I think, this is where I think the toxic positivity kind of angle comes in, is that and again, I don't mean be redundant for my audience, but it's like blue box, green box, right? The two hardware, right? Blue box gets blue games and green games. Green box gets green games. And to me, that says it's like, so why would you ever buy the other one then?
Well, Blue box gets blue games and green games at full price. Green box gets green games and some multi-plats. Well, no, it doesn't.
You get multi-platform games. I mean, we all share that, and you get MLB The Show or whatever.
Yeah. So, well, not this year, right? So
not
this
on Game
year,
Pass.
This year, green box gets MLB The Show and all the games for $20 a month. So if you're a really active user, I've always said I do think Game Pass is a fantastic value. I think it's a really great service that allows you to play more games, but it has come at the cost where, they're going to release multi-platform apparently going forward, and there will be an exclusivity window. I think that Microsoft has another plan up their sleeve with the next console and the next handheld that they're developing, where they're going to come up with an OS, and Jason Ronald hinted as much at CES, an OS that allows you to install other storefronts like Steam and Epic Games Store, and the play as Windows going forward. It's not like an exclusive Xbox OS. And Mudahar over at Ordinary Gamers, he had the same idea. So I made a video like a year ago talking about it. I'm like, well, what if they just opened the box and just made it a Windows box where you can have Steam? Phil Spencer already teased Epic Games Store, which gets all the PlayStation games. So now Green Box gets all the blue games, all the green games, and everything on PC. They just get everything. So it's a one-stop shop.
But play that. I'm glad you bring this up, because I've wanted to talk to someone about this, because in my mind, this ultimately doesn't make sense from the specific point of view of what does Microsoft get from putting Steam on an Xbox? Steam's not going to give them any money. So it's like, so you're selling a piece of hardware maybe at cost, right? And then you're sending them to another storefront. This to me it breaks down very quickly. Like it's a great fucking idea. And I think it's what's going to ultimately happen, is that they will have like a Windows style machine. And that sounds awesome. But I do struggle to understand why anyone would buy anything on Xbox at that point. Why wouldn't you just buy things on Steam? And Valve's not going to be like, yeah, we'll give you a cut. They're not going to. So that to me is where it breaks down, because the console install is about selling things on the console. And if you have a console out there where you're not selling things on it, what's the point?
Well, do you still have have you heard of like the ROG Ally or all these other handhelds?
My again, I keep bringing my wife up, but yeah, she has one. She has a lower end one, like the Logitech one, and she connects it to her Xbox specifically to play it.
Yeah.
But those are like ROG or Logitech are not Microsoft, and they're making hardware for hardware's sake. This is where I think it's not that I think it's a dead end. It's that I think people need to massage this idea more, because I don't think they're really thinking it through, where it's like, and I think this is probably going to be a problem for Microsoft internally, is like, if we're going to make a box and deploy it, where do we make the money? If Xbox will be an option on that box, and maybe and that will give people backwards compatibility and all the kind of stuff, which is why I think that people worrying about losing their games and stuff, I think is silly even in the long term, because I don't think that's going to happen. But
I think the $1 trillion company is going to manage to keep your game library on hand.
I would suspect so. Yeah.
I teased the Icon era because they said something like PlayStation should step up and figure out how to make sure Xbox gamers keep their content library. I'm like, what even is this thread on my feed right
that was
now?
based on something weird that Mike Ybarra had said, right? About which it's funny, man, because I kind of, not to sound like an asshole, but I kind of came up with a similar idea about achievements and trophies, where I was like, imagine you're an Xbox guy and you're like, I have all my achievements. And then PlayStation made some sort of module where it's like, put in your name and connect it to your PSN name. And then any identical games that we have, we'll just bring your achievements over and give you the trophies. But he was, which I think is a pretty cool idea, although I don't think possible. But he was saying, like, what if there were like licensing fees that were paid by these different people that allowed the games to transfer to PlayStation? Because he was looking at it as like the inevitability that that's going to happen. And I'm like, that's fucking crazy. Like that's a really interesting idea. I'm not saying he's crazy. That's a tough nut to crack, though, about how that would look.
I don't think there's a world where the $1 billion company helps out the $1 trillion company. And like, that's not me being mean to Sony or PlayStation. Like, I don't know why. Xbox has confirmed they're making new hardware. Mm-hmm. So we're good for like another decade, at least.
Yeah, I would think so too. Well, because people ask, it's funny, Destin, people ask that about Duke as well, where it's like, what's going to happen to Maddie and Cog? Yeah. And I'm like, I'm really not worried about that because I don't think Xbox is going anywhere. I just think the landscape has changed. But I don't think that's like I don't think the Xbox brand is going anywhere in the midterm anyway. I think in the long term, everyone's going to go away in some sense. But
I think it's going to continue to drastically change. And during your Shuhei interview, you also talked about how you think, and I don't want to misquote you, so correct me if I'm wrong, you think that PlayStation will also be making some changes in the future also, like
definitely
10 years out.
I don't know how much you've heard me talk about this, Destin, so I'll just put it on the table now, is that I am unusually aggressive for a PlayStation fan about multi-platform stuff, where I'm of the mind that, like, when the Helldivers 2 to Xbox rumors were happening, I'm like, no, it's not. Like, if you look at it, ideally, it's like Sony doesn't want to help Microsoft because they can peel those people off and bring them over. And I think they realize that, and it's kind of been happening, or, maybe in the Xbox One, PS4 generation, that kind of happened. So I think they're like, yeah, we're cool with not working with them in the short to midterm. I think in the long term, maybe. But I do believe that PC releases are vital, that they should be happening day and date, even for single player games. And that I do not believe that the Venn diagram crossover between PC gaming and PlayStation is that big. I think if you want a game on PlayStation, you'll buy it on PlayStation. If you want it on PC, you'll buy it on PC. The Venn diagram crossover are people like you and me. But most people are not you and me. Most people just are in where they're at. And here's my evidence of this. And I wonder what you think of this. My evidence is that the more PlayStation games come on PC, the fewer copies they sell, with the exception of Helldivers. And the reason is not because the games are getting worse, but because the novelty factor is gone. That's why Days Gone sold so well on PC. It's because of what? Like, it's a PlayStation game or the original Horizon. And then by the time you get all these years later to Spider-Man 2, it's like, it's really not that special anymore. And so I think PlayStation fans should look at that and say, like, that's not a threat. It's what Shuhei was saying. That's like free money. They're not coming over one way or the other. They're not coming over to your console. And so that's one controversial thing where my audience hates. The second thing they hate even more, and that's something I brought up to Shuhei as well, is that I think PlayStation should bring many games to Switch too. And the reason that I think this is because PS5 games, and certainly beyond, will not run on Switch 2. So you have no danger of generational crossover. But if you have a game like Infamous Second Son or the Uncharted trilogy, Killzone, Shadowfall, whatever, it's like, who gives a shit? Like, just...
I don't know, Colin. If
they're dead. They're dead games. Just go sell them.
I'm selling my PS5. It's Shadowfall.
Right. Like, that's my whole thing, is like, silly. I think people are too precious about exclusivity as a broad term and not surgical exclusivity, which really should be generational exclusivity. And it goes into what I was saying about PC, where it's like, they don't want to come over. With Switch, it literally cannot run your new games. You're not going to be able to run Returnal on a Switch 2. You're not going to be able to run Astrobot or any of those games. So you don't have to worry about it. No one's going to worry about it. It can't happen. But for all of the legacy stuff, I just don't see why you wouldn't, So I am very aggressive as a PlayStation fan, and most PlayStation fans think I'm crazy for that. Yeah. But that's where I stand. What do you think of that?
I mean, yeah, I hear you. Should they do it? Sure. Will they? Not yet. I don't think they need to yet, but they are in this place where they're spending $200 to $300 million on the games that they're making. And they're looking at the ROI on some of this stuff and saying, we need to make more Miles Morales, fewer Spider-Man 2s. So something's going to give at some point, I think. And
right. Yeah. I think you're right. And I also think, Destin, and this is what you were talking about with indie, was I think Sony has fallen a bit into a licensing trap that they want to get out of, because it doesn't just stop with Insomniac and the Marvel shit. Wolverine's going to be another thing. The Insomniac leak showed how serious those licensing fees are. And it made me rethink even their relationship with MLB, because when the show came over to Switch and Xbox, a lot of people were saying like it was the MLB that made them do it, which I think is probably true. But for the first time in my mind, I was like, there's another option actually, which is that Sony was looking at these licensing costs with the MLB and being like, we got to sell more copies of this game. You know, like, so I think that that's probably not what happened. But for the first time, I'm open in my mind where I'm like, these guys don't want to be beholden to these heavy licensing fees. It's why when Blade was announced and it didn't show Xbox logos, it was immediately obvious to me. I'm like, that's a PlayStation game too. Like, there's no way that
has that been confirmed?
No, but that was what's funny about that is that you were talking about canaries in the coal mine, right? Like hints.
Yeah,
that was the first hint. That was even before, because that was, I think. That was like late 23, I want to say. And that was the first hint in my mind where I'm like, they're going to start putting games on PlayStation directly, because that's the first time I've ever seen, I watch all this shit. It's the first time I've ever seen no Game Pass logo, no Xbox logo. It's just the game logo. And I'm like, And then lo and behold, they announced those 4 games and so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying is I think ultimately Sony is, to get back on track, Sony is on, and I'll do a video about this at some point because I think it needs to be explained, is that Sony is on the same path Microsoft's on. It's just going to take a lot longer, I think, to get there.
They're Icarus with wax wings, but they're melting slower.
Right. Like, it's like, how do you put this? PlayStation is Sony is so dependent on PlayStation, like really dependent on it, that as you saw with you did the financials, so you know, where they can't fuck around too badly with it. Like the idea... We heard a little bit about the experimentation. Again, this was in the Insomniac leak when they put Horizon Forbidden West onto PS Plus early. And they were like, oh, we lost like $90 million doing that, we think, because we just gave it away to millions of people, but we wanted to see what happens. And those kinds of things really hurt them. That's why the Bungie acquisition is like disastrous, because it's like, damn, dude, that's a lot of money to amortize for a smaller company. So I think
that's been... Out of all their investments, I think the Bungie investment was the worst. And it's kind of on Bungie, because I feel like they gave them misleading financials. And then they get their first real report and it's a 40%. I think it was like over 40% miss. That's like a studio, like shut it down level miss. And that's why they went through such a drastic restructuring. That's
what I was saying on our show. I was like, if they weren't owned by someone, they might have actually gone out of business, or at least needed to have a fire sale to, sell themselves to a publisher or something for pennies on the dollar at that point. Yeah, I think that was I'm well on record that from the very beginning, I'm like, this makes no sense. This is stupid. And this is a lot of money. And they should have, if they wanted to buy something, it's like, go buy Square Enix or something. Like, go buy something that makes sense for you. Don't buy, and I don't think any of these things make sense. I don't think even that makes sense. But Bungie certainly didn't make any sense. And the great irony of it, and you're a Bungie fan, so it's like, they're like, we're buying Bungie. We need their expertise. And we need their help. And then fast forward 2 years, and Sony's running the company. They fire the board. Sony's now the board. And they're running this company that they needed help with. So they have no idea what the fuck they're doing. They have no idea. No idea. So in this regard. Yeah. And now this loss, they'll never make that money back. Ever. I don't care how big Marathon is. It's not going to make them their $4 billion.
Yeah. I'm concerned about, I love Bungie as a company. Well, unfortunately, we've gotten a lot of news as of late that there's some not great stuff. Like there's a lawsuit with Christopher Barrett that's in progress. Pete Parsons is showing off his cars, then firing people the next day. Like, what are you doing, Pete? Yeah. And this idea that I remember I sat down at IGN with Pete Parsons, and he did an interview talking about how great it was to go independent and their vision for the future and allowing people to come here and do their best work. It was all marketing to sell the company. Like, that's my read on it now in hindsight. And I'm like, so yeah, I feel like he just played everybody and he's fine. But what about all the lawsuits that are going to come in from Noseworthy and, oh no, I think they settled. But a lot of the people from the Destiny community and the Destiny team, they got hosed bad. And it's not right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't like how the Bungie stuff played out. I love the Bungie games. I'm a big fan of Bungie. They're a big reason I'm in the industry because I made a fan video and it kind of kicked things off because I won a contest and then whatever. So I have a long history with Bungie, but where they are today, I'm rooting for them, but I have some problems with their leadership.
Yeah, I am perplexed that the deal was ever done. Sony got totally hosed. Anyone involved, and it's not the only thing they got hosed on. I mean, the Firewalk Concord shit was a disaster. That cost them hundreds of millions of dollars.
How many more Concords can they have?
These things are really expensive. It's like they are. It's funny that Shu has been talking recently about how the PS3 almost shut PlayStation down, and if it wasn't for the Wega TVs or whatever, they would have died. And this is kind of a similar thing where it's not quite as extreme because PlayStation does so well, but PlayStation's doing well in spite of itself. That's the thing I keep telling the audience is like it's like a cake. Really tasty cake coming out of the oven, but it doesn't have icing on it. Like it's a really good cake, but damn, imagine how good it would be if you had some fucking icing on it. And all they needed to do, the games as a service stuff, I don't think was a mistake. I just think it's the way they pursued it and like the options that they made, the choices that they made along the way. That was the mistake. Going after that shit, I think is smart. They should. That was one of the videos I put out recently. Was they should keep doing it, but they got to make better decisions. Because you got to have success there. But to wrap up what I was saying earlier is that it's like Sony won't get to the decisions Microsoft's getting because it puts the PlayStation platform in too much danger and they make too much money for free on PlayStation. So this is the argument why I think that just player base wise, if you brought like Helldivers to Xbox, it's like, that's interesting. But what's the other side of it? It's like, well, PlayStation fans are going to get really fucking mad, first of all. You're going to sell this game on a platform and get 70% instead of 100% of it. They'll get 30%. So you're really getting net 40%, right? If you compare yourself to your competition. We can't. I think what their mindset is like, we want to wait Xbox out, and then when Xbox is no longer relevant, then we will hopefully be like the ubiquitous platform that could become something digital. Let's say 2040, you turn on your TV, there's a PlayStation app. I think they just need to put that off as long as possible because it potentially puts into upheaval the entire market. Like the reason they wanted to chase games as a service, as you well know, is because they look at their financials and they're like, Jesus Christ, like we're just sitting here doing nothing, making hundreds of millions of dollars a quarter on this shit. What if we just made all of it? Like that to me is reasonable enough. So
I think axing the Naughty Dog game was a mistake. I think out of all of the stuff that we've heard about, like God of War maybe, but I think the Naughty Dog one had the biggest potential, but maybe Naughty Dog wanted to retain creative control with whatever that was going to be. But they could have given it to a Bungie or somebody else once they established it, so they could continue making stuff like, what is it, Intergalactic is their next game, right?
Right.
So I do think that was a big opportunity for them. I think Fairgames is dangerously close to looking like another Concord. I don't see a lot of interest about it. I'm not sold on it personally. I don't know what that game is supposed to be, So yeah, I think it's just weird tonally, or at least the way it was presented, and I don't see a lot of a buy-in on it. But something in the God of War realm, because Ascension had some multiplayer aspects to it that were kind of interesting, if I remember right. I remember, some of the people on X were talking about, you should go play Ascension because the servers are still on.
Yeah, I was going to say that the servers are still actually up, which is hysterical. The Last of Us Online, and that's what I said to Shu on the interview, was like, I know people who have played it, and it's supposed to be very good. And that's what he was saying too. That was the story that a lot of people were writing. It's like the game wasn't the problem. It was like what it required out of the studio. And that surprised me a little bit, just from planning perspectives, but also from why not just spin all. It's like you're saying, you don't have to give it to Bungie or someone. Just say like, and I know this is easier said than done, and it's not quite so simplistic, but go to the team and say, who's really passionate about this game? Like, what if we spun an outfit off and 50 of you went, and once we launch this thing, you're the ones who deal with it. And the rest of us that want to work on Intergalactic and The Last of Us 3 and all the rest will stay. And you'll be Naughty Dog North or whatever the fuck. Like, to me, I just felt like it required more cleverness, because people that have played it, I think, are surprised that it was canceled, not only from a quality perspective, but how done it was. And so I think they were just, the unfortunate reality, and again, I know you know this, but I think a lot of people don't think about this, is like, when you cancel something that deep into development, you're looking at it and saying, what if we just wrote this down? Like, we never sold it. It's why everyone that bought Concord got a refund, even if you didn't want one. Because they're like, we need to get this back to zero revenue and then write the entire project off on our taxes. And I think they look at that, and that's, you don't get all your money back, but you're able to reduce your taxable income. And sadly, I think that's kind of the play with a lot of this shit. Cancel that game, cancel that game. We'll write off 20 million there, 40 million there, 60 million there. What they should have done, again, I don't think
marketing. So they're probably not to the $100 million mark yet on a lot of those.
Right, exactly. I think The Last of Us Online was the most expensive game they canceled by far. And I think that's like a 3 or 4 year, multiple hundreds of people project. So that's going to be a lot of money at Naughty Dog. They're probably their most expensive studio. But the other ones were probably relatively cheap, and they walked away from them. But again, I don't think the pursuit of those games was a bad idea. I think it was a bad idea to use your own resources to do them, when you could have probably gotten second and time third-party exclusive content from people that know how to make those games. And all they want from you is your money. So you don't need to go buy the cow. Just fucking fund the game. Let them live for a few years, and they'll worry about the rest later. That to me seems so obvious. So that's why when people question, like, really what went wrong with Concord and all the shit I know from behind the scenes, it's like, no, they really did believe in it. The reason you know that is because they bought the fucking studio a year before the game came out. They believed in it. They believed in it so much they were afraid they were going to get corded away, you know? And they wanted to be like, no, we need them for Concord for the next 10 years. So these people really have no clue what they're doing. It wasn't the idea. It was just the execution was so botched.
Did they play test it? Like, I don't know. If you were asking me to put $400 million or $200 million even in a Concord, I would have watched the first 3 cinematics, been like, what are you doing? Those cinematics, the storytelling, like, I know there's all the drama around Concord and how it flopped and everything like that. But if you just look at the big hook, which was the story was very bad. It was so surface level. You don't know who these characters are. It's like jumping into season 3 of a television show. And yeah, I don't know. It just did not resonate with me from a storytelling perspective at all. Maybe the gameplay could have been fine-tuned a little bit, but yeah, I'm very surprised that was the bet. In hindsight, like, why not have that team make the Last of Us game and not do Concord? Because they had the whole infrastructure built to support a game for a decade. Anyway, it's hindsight, you know. Concord,
I wish I could, like, I have to talk to more people. Like, people have, since I started talking about Concord publicly, and the people that have been talking to me, I've gotten more people reaching out to me, and it's like so interesting. It's like, damn, dude, this was pretty crazy. And you can see the evidence. The evidence is everywhere if you know where to look about how big they thought it was going to be. It got its own controller. The secret level anthology introduced a new character that was going to roll out in the game at the time. Like, they thought they were just got so far ahead of their skis, not real. And I think that they knew the jig was up when the game's beta happened. And as you recall, the first weekend of beta was for people that pre-ordered, and so few people pre-ordered that they just opened it up. At that point, you knew, I was like, this thing is done. Fairgames, I think, is interesting because it intellectually, right? Like, academically, it benefits the most from Concord's failure because it can rework itself. But as we know, you and I know how games are made, and a lot of people that listen do too. And as we saw with the Kill the Justice League game, even if you take a game behind the scenes again, there's only so much you can do with it once it's deployed. You have to basically, if you want to get really into the nitty gritty, you basically are making a new game at that point. So I wonder if they're looking at Fairgames specifically. Probably Concord's gameplay wasn't the problem. And I doubt Fairgames' gameplay was the problem either, or is going to be the problem. It's everything around it. It looks like a Ubisoft game. So I wonder if they were going to use this extra time and behind the scenes be like, we got to really, like, radically change the art or something. Very similar to what happened with the original Borderlands, as you might recall, where Borderlands 1.
What happened with that?
Borderlands 1 had like a totally serious Fallout style art style. And then at some point, like late in development, they're like, now we're going to make it cell shaded, to the point where if you read about it, the original art director of the original Borderlands was so like insulted and hurt by it that she never worked in games ever again after that.
Really?
Yeah. Like, because they like,
well, it was the right call.
Absolutely. So you could, and that happened very late in development. So you can imagine that maybe something like that would happen here, that they would have to save it. So I think I'm not confident about Fairgames by any stretch of the imagination, but I believe that it has a better chance now that Concord failed, because I think they can at least try to figure something out for it.
I don't know. I don't know what that game is.
It's like a it's going to be like a Payday game, I think, or like a Rainbow Six Siege or something. I think something like,
Yeah, definitely. My radar is up on that one, but I'll wait and see.
I personally love the idea of, and again, it's what you're exposed to, because I know everyone's like, this is like Marvel writing and stuff. And I'm like, I don't really watch Marvel stuff, so I can't relate. But I do like the rich going after, or the poor going after the rich, and like the Robin Hood redistribution of wealth, and like targeting people who are rich. I think it's a cool idea and premise. It actually sounds like a cool single player game, if anything, but about these guys that are deployed, like a mercenary force that's deployed to go rob like mansions and parties and shit. That would be kind of cool, but we'll see. I'm not confident in it either, but they must feel something about it because they didn't cancel it. I don't know if
it's the only one that's good still, right? Everything else is done.
Right. Like the Deviation game was canceled, but that game, I think, was kind of taken on board by the new Jason Blundell team that they just not announced. There are at least, I guess there are 3 PlayStation first party studios that have not been revealed yet that are working on games, as far as we understand. And one of them is working on that game. So it's unclear if that was like kind of the skeleton of that game, or if they're just working on something brand new. Because for people that don't know, Deviation was making a shooter that was announced around the same time that the Firewalk relationship was announced and the Haven relationship was announced. And we reported on Sacred Symbols first that game was canceled, but I think they just didn't like some of the people that worked there, it seems, and so they just kind of reorganized and then brought a bunch of them in house into a studio themselves. Not unlike what happened with Bungie and Gummy Bears, which is another one of the studios that's now new, that's unannounced. And then presumably there's an Uncharted game in development, and that's being done by someone else. The reason we think that, Uncharted. A lot of the audience thinks this is crazy, but the reason that we think that is because, and you might recall, this was like 18 months ago or so, there was a live action PlayStation commercial that clearly has Cassie Drake in it. And it's like, well, I don't know why you would, all these other games exist, so I don't know why you would tease this, female archaeologist with the torch, looking at artifacts and stuff. And I'm like, well, that's Drake's daughter, I think. So,
yeah. I mean, I would be down for that. Uncharted 2, I remember, had multiplayer, and it was great.
Yeah.
It was really, really fun. I played it out a lot back in the day. And if anybody could make something really, really interesting, it would be an interesting multiplayer game. I think it would be Uncharted.
Dude, I also think, I think the Uncharted game will be single player primarily, but maybe with a mode, which would be cool. But
yeah,
The Last of Us Online,
like, Factions do a light version of. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I thought I was going to say, like, Factions, I think, was the high point of their online efforts, in my opinion, which is what spawned The Last of Us Online. They had no idea that Factions was good, and it ended up being great. So, but I'm sorry, you were saying something. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, you don't have to make Destiny in the Last of Us universe. You can just make a really good Uncharted multiplayer game, and you can do all of the monetization that you would do in any other project similar to that. So yeah, I don't know. I think they definitely have something there that would be worth exploring. I had a question for you.
Sure.
Just sort of going back to Xbox, PlayStation stuff. Why do you think, like, when I look at the financials and I'll put something out on X, I'll be like, okay, yeah, the PlayStation 5 is selling well. They're doing amazing. But I don't understand why people are so focused on console sales, because it's an important part of the picture, but there's a much more interesting story being told here beyond where their console sales are. Because if you compare it, like, if you go through December 31st, they have failed to outsell the PlayStation 4 every year. This year, they're still 2% behind where the PlayStation 4 could be. And I think 2025 is going to be a very interesting year for PlayStation, because of Grand Theft Auto 6, they could see an uptick in console sales, and that would be the year that would put them ahead of where the PlayStation 4 was. But how come you think, why do you think people are so focused on console sales, which I think most analysts say isn't growing, or it's growing at like a 1% rate, which just, that's the whole reason PlayStation's diversifying. Like, how come people don't want to have that conversation? I don't know.
Yeah, I still think it matters in the sense that like PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4 comparably selling, a few million off or whatever, I think is pretty significant just based on the 2013, the PS4 enters into the market at $400 and it's a really great economy. And things are moving nicely. It's like the best economy since the 90s. And then I think you have the PS5 launching into this situation much more expensive and harder to find. The economy's bad. And like to keep some level of pace, I don't think is anything to like turn your nose up at in some sense, because I think it's a pretty significant accomplishment. But I think the reason that console sales are important, or at least why they're relevant to most people, is because that is the conduit by which the money is made. Like if Sony's not selling, and this is what I was saying earlier about being dependent on PlayStation. It's like if Sony's not putting PlayStations into the wild, then they have no real way of making money. They'll make a little bit of money on PC. They want to get mobile stuff out eventually. They're taking forever on that. Maybe they sell ports here and there, but they need captive PlayStation audiences that play Fortnite on PlayStation so they get their 30%, and that they buy Call of Duty on PlayStation, and that they buy a PlayStation game like Astrobot once in a while and all of that. So I think that's why console sales are relatively important. Without one, for PlayStation, without one, there is not the other. There's no money to be made without the console.
I think it's definitely an interesting data point, but it is like, the reality is it's about 1.98% behind PS4 sales. And I nerd out about this stuff. It's just sort of like a hobby. But so initially, the first year they were dead even. The second year they were about 14% behind, 15% behind. The crazy thing is in 2023, when the shortages let up, they were 4% behind. And this year they're about, we'll just say 2% behind. I think in 2025, when PlayStation 4 sales started to decline, we're at a space where I think PlayStation 5 could take off. And I think the Pro is actually going to wind up being a smart investment on Sony's behalf, because I think people are going to get the Pro to play Grand Theft Auto 6. I'm going to. I actually bought a Pro and I wasn't using it initially, so I just returned it, and I'm like, I'm just going to buy this when Grand Theft Auto comes out, because I'm not utilizing it right now. And, I was leaving the company and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, am I using this thing right now? No, I'll buy it in September or whatever. Maybe there'll be a sale. But anyway, so I think that's an interesting piece of the puzzle for sure. I think what's more interesting is they have grown PSN from 10.9 million in 2014 to 111 million. And since 2021, at the end of the year, I'm using MAUs for the end of the year, because December is like a high. That Q3 for PlayStation ends December 31st. So in 2021, it's 111, 112, 123, 129. And the fact that they're talking about that something like 40% of the people who bought a PlayStation were new players, that is such a significant data point that I think people are just not really latching onto or not recognizing, like, hey, that is a huge jump for PlayStation. New users, 40% jump. Is that coming from PC? Because we know that you have to have PSN login for a lot of the games that are coming to PlayStation. Anyway, point being, I think 2025 is going to be a huge year for PlayStation. I think it could be like a record-breaking year for them on all metrics because of Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah,
I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen with Xbox, but Xbox comparably, if you look at their data, I nerd about this every Sunday on my stream, by the way. If you look comparably, it's like, let's give Xbox the benefit of the doubt and give them the most optimistic metric that I've seen online. I think they're around 32 million personally, but the most optimistic metric is they're around 35.9 shipped. That puts them comparably to where the Xbox One was. Now, I put out a video several months ago saying, hey, this isn't good. The Xbox console is failing to outsell the Xbox One, which was universally panned by almost everybody and struggled. So now they have, I think it's a solid console. It's like really compelling, and a lot of the features the console has are really, really interesting, but it's selling less than the last generation. Like that's more significant, I think, for Microsoft than it is for PlayStation, where PlayStation's at like a 2% decline, but they're narrowing the gap. Xbox, they're just at best, like with the most nice metric that I can give them, they're matching where the Xbox One is. That's not good. And I think that's a big reason why they're going multi-plat. Sorry, just
no, I think I love the numbers too, man. So that's totally you're among we're kindred spirits in that regard. I love the data too. I think it's interesting because there is going to be an ultimate decline in console gaming, not only by virtue of the way people play games. Younger people don't seem to be as interested in console gaming by any stretch of the imagination as we were and our generations were. So there's that. But I also just think there's an inexorable march towards like a unified, it's not like a platform thing, but it's like your TV becomes agnostic and you connect to PlayStation Network like you connect to Netflix.
Yeah.
And I think that this has been some theory for years, and I think it's the only thing holding it back is the technical feasibility of it with our infrastructure and all of that. But I think a lot of this stuff will be overcome. And then I think the consoles will all kind of go away, which is what I was saying earlier about why I just think everyone's on the same march towards the same end. It's just a matter of like how you get there and in what order you get there. And I think Microsoft is very interested, as it is a software company first, in it. You know, it's like Microsoft is the biggest publisher of games on PlayStation. It already is right now. So that's only going to, because it's Call of Duty plus Minecraft plus Bethesda plus the Xbox Game Studio stuff. It's just, that's way bigger of a footprint than anyone. I would imagine Call of Duty plus Minecraft puts it probably over the top by itself. So, so I think that there's a lot to kind of wade through about the order of operations, but I think everyone ultimately ends up in the same place by virtue of consumer behavior and technologies. But I would listen, Destin, I would love to think that in the 2040s we're still playing on consoles, but I don't it's think hard for me to believe that, you know?
Yeah. No, I don't think consoles will go anywhere. Just like hardwired mice didn't go anywhere, right? Like, sure, we got rid of the trackball, but I don't think we get rid of the console. I think there's going to be people that really care about the lowest latency possible. But I do think that, you know, the cloud is going to grow. I do think that new technologies are going to rise, and I hope both companies utilize them. PlayStation's like really interesting because I feel like I didn't like Jim Ryan as a leader. I know he had a lot of successes and everything, but like hearing that, like he gave Shuhei the ultimatum of like, you have to take the indies, which I love Shuhei Yoshida. I think he did so much for PlayStation, and I really love seeing all the interviews with him because I just think he really cared, you know. And when we were talking about the indie stories about how indies didn't feel represented, and he stepped up and he made sure that he corrected that issue, that means a lot to those smaller developers. And I was critical of Sony for how indie developers were talking about the experience on the PlayStation Network, and who fixed it? Shu. So I think them losing him, it's unfortunate. It seems amicable, and like he doesn't have any ill will toward Jim Ryan, but it's just another reason why Jim Ryan sort of bothered me. He also like brokered the Bungie deal. He was flying all around the place saying, "Oh, we're going to go out of business if Xbox buys Call of Duty." And some of the stuff he did was weird. Strangely enough, though, he seemed like a super nice person in all the interviews. In all the interviews, he seems nice, but in terms of business decisions, I'm often left scratching my head about why he did what he did.
I think from a hardware perspective, he did a great job. I think from a software perspective, it's fairly clear now that he set the entire operation back an entire generation, it seems like. I mean, if you think about
Nishino and Cerny deserve the credit, really, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, well, Jim's a marketer by trade, and he, I think, really worked the phones and got the wheels of commerce kind of greased to get consoles out as much as they could. Remember, like they were like putting PlayStation 5s on 747s and like shipping them that way and like doing whatever they could. I think that there was something about that was him. And that's good, because I think that they were very aggressive with PlayStation 5 at a time when people were getting their UBI checks and when people were home for months at a time and all of that. And they kind of pounced and did a really nice job with that. But behind the scenes, what we didn't know was like, and this goes back into the cake without the icing reference. It's like, so yeah, man, we got ourselves a really nice cake here. So let's get some of the games on here and fucking start, we'll get the knife out. We'll very delicately put the buttermilk on and all the rest. And he's like, oh no, we have Blue Point making a God of War multiplayer game. And it's like, what? Like, what are you doing? Like you sold this wonderful console. That's why when Saros was announced by Housemarque, I was like, oh, thank fucking God. Because it's like, I was saying on the show, it's like, oh, they're probably literally making like a MOBA, or something like ridiculous, like something ridiculous. You have your remake studio making a multiplayer game. You have, Bend making a game as a service, all this. So this is resource allocation that was his fault. And the acquisitions were some of them were good. Housemarque and Blue Point were good acquisitions. But
Housemarque's great. Returnal was I think I gave it to Infinite because I'm just a Halo fanboy. But Returnal was right there. I had a really tough decision. That game is play Returnal. Not enough people played it. I made a massive video for IGN about just how wonderful that game is. I got to talk to the devs, and yeah, it's great. Sorry.
I agree. Great. It's a great, Housemarque's awesome. And so those acquisitions were good, and Jim did those, but buying Firewalk and Haven is unclear, but it seems like it's on the Haven acquisition was interesting. I liked the Haven acquisition at the time a little bit more, just because I was like, well, they have no Quebecois or Canadian presence. And that's Montreal is a really important place to be, to get good talent, but we'll see what happens. But obviously the Bungie thing was a disaster, and the Bungie acquisition cost more than every PlayStation acquisition ever combined. So,
I think the acquisition came from a place of fear because of the Activision deal.
Oh,
it
definitely.
It seemed really reactionary, and they really didn't need to do it. They were doing well. So yeah, I mean, I think at the time I was a little happy about it, but in hindsight is not good. I remember Pachter said it makes no sense. This is the worst deal they've ever done, and turns out he would be right on that one.
Yeah, it was sloppy and annoying, and yeah, it's going to cost them a great deal over the time, because they're obviously going to have to withstand and absorb these losses over time. Plus Marathon, I'm not sure about Marathon. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
It's not going to be a Destiny, I don't think.
No, that's what I was saying, is like, for them to make, I was telling people this because I'm like, it's a zero-sum thing in some sense, where they spent almost $4 billion on the deal, but they've been spending all of this money developing the game and keeping the studio alive and losing money on that. So when Marathon comes out, they have to make that back first, and then the continual money of keeping it going, and then you could start chipping away at the debt, as it were. And it's just not in the cards. It would have to be a Fortnite or an Apex Legends level game, basically, for it to make that level of money. So the deal made no fucking sense at all. How do you feel about Nintendo? We're going to hear more about their stuff soon. But what do you think about what's going on with them?
Nintendo. Here's what I love about Nintendo. They had the Wii U. It almost screwed up the whole company. And then they had the Switch, which is potentially going to outsell that PS2 number. We'll see, because obviously the Switch 2 is coming. And
I love how Sony revised. Did you see that Sony revised the PS2 numbers? That was so funny to me, where they added like 4 million to it.
Yeah, that was funny. Just give us a few more years in that number one spot. But yeah, we'll see what happens with the Switch. I think the Switch 2 is great. Nintendo has really found a sweet spot where they know their potential sell-through on every single IP. They don't overinvest in terms of budget for things that, honestly, gamers online have such a focus on graphics. But I think just good gameplay needs to be at the heart of what you're developing. And Nintendo and PlayStation. But Nintendo knows that. Nintendo knows that if we make another Legend of Zelda, like Tears of the Kingdom was phenomenal, and they did some really, really interesting stuff with the gameplay in that game on a potato, like, it doesn't matter how pretty the graphics are. And the game's even pretty. So I don't know. They have it locked in. So I am stoked about the Switch 2, and I just can't wait to see Nintendo continue to succeed.
Yeah, they identified, I think, the diminishing returns of hardware first. And they might have even done it like GameCube was actually a fairly powerful machine, but by the time you get to Wii, it was like Yeah, I think they started to understand. And the DS versus the PSP, although they were kind of concurrent to each other and so on and so forth, and 3DS and Vita, I think they just realized, yeah, exactly what you're saying. There's a market for what we're not selling, which is high fidelity games, but there's a major market for, cartoonish, IP driven, high quality gameplay games. I mean, I grew up a Nintendo fanboy. I know, I get it. Like it's great. So I'm rooting for them too, and I'm excited. I mean, I'm sure my wife is one of the co-hosts of our Nintendo show, and so I'm sure we'll have the Switch 2 in the house when it comes out. But I'm excited to see it, and I'm excited to see how Microsoft and Sony interact with it, because I do think it's going to be a machine that courts ports from both of them. I think you'll see more of them and earlier from Microsoft, but I really won't be surprised if you start seeing PlayStation games on Switch 2. And again, not new stuff, but old stuff. I just don't see why you wouldn't explore that. What do you
I look
what do you have to
forward
lose?
Seeing the reaction online to when that happens.
Right, because Lego Horizon itself had a lot of people melt down, and that I think was a licensing thing, but I also think it had to do with Sony being like, what we have to start investigating and learning about this platform more. I think MLB The Show has taught them a lot about the platform, but I think they want to see how they can spread the field without hurting themselves focally. And so I just don't feel like that's the end. I feel like that's the beginning. But hey, man, the path we're talking about of like going third party and universal, I think Nintendo's on that path too. I think they're just going to be the last ones to get there. And ultimately, I do believe in the future, it's not that there will be universal platforms per se, but I just think there's going to be connectivity like PSN, Xbox Live, Nintendo Online, functionality on your television or on a unified box, whatever the case might be. And I don't think it's going to be in 5 or 10 years, but I think it just seems inevitable. Like, I don't understand how that doesn't happen at some point.
My guess was 2040. And the reason is like that gives technology more than enough time to catch up and get where it needs to be in terms of latency and display and everything. But yeah, we're going to be opening up apps on our TV, or like it's the box option isn't going anywhere. I don't think consoles are never going to be sold, but I think there's going to be other avenues to play all of the games. Open up your Nintendo app, you have all your Nintendo games. Open up your Xbox app, you have all your Xbox games. And PlayStation, I mean, they have job postings that they're working on this stuff. So it's not like a big secret or anything like that. So I think Nintendo would be last. All the analysts basically highlight that Nintendo is exploring licensing out their IP to make movies or expanding their IP to amusement parks and things like that. They're not doing games yet, but they are definitely expanding in a really interesting way. I think PlayStation has done the same thing. I thought the Gran Turismo movie was pretty good, honestly.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know about the Uncharted movie, but Neil Blomkamp did a great job with the Gran Turismo flick. I was critical of Gran Turismo going in because I don't like it when marketing seems to be potentially misleading. And I felt like they were doing that with GT7 a little bit about the ray tracing or whatever. And I didn't like, there's no need to do that, in my opinion, because the game's fantastic. So I think Gran Turismo is fantastic. I did like Forza when I played it, but I did find myself going back to Gran Turismo 7 more than Forza personally. Anyway,
I'll be interested to see Gran Turismo and Forza although Forza Horizon is not the mainline Forza, but them on the same market will be interesting to see.
Yeah,
I think Forza Horizon is going to do really well on PlayStation.
Oh yeah, every Xbox game that has come to PlayStation, it ends up top of the charts. Like Sea of Thieves came over. That game was like 6 years old, and it was #1 for like a month. It was, or longer.
I think there will be diminishing returns on this too, like there was with PC releases for Sony. But I don't think that the diminishing returns will happen for big guns. Like I think Forza is going to be interesting. Gears will be interesting, and Halo will be interesting. And I was saying that Halo could literally sell 5 to 10 million copies on PlayStation, I think, if they release Master Chief Collection. It's that big of a deal. I think if that happened, it would be crazy, and it's going to happen. I mean, it's happening. Like, so it's a matter of when it happens and how those games do. But I will be interested about the smaller stuff, like what will come over and how will it do? Like, what will the trend line be? And I think it's going to be based more on just the intrinsic quality of the game. But I think there's a novelty factor that's really helping right now. Pentiment, I thought was great, and I bought Hi-Fi Rush, but I have not played it yet. the Sea of Thieves and Grounded are not my kind of game, so I'm not going to play those. But and
fine.
I'll play indie. I'll play that for. What's funny about that is I was going to play that on Xbox. I was going to be like, oh yeah, yes, I guess so. And then they announced it was coming to PlayStation. I'm like, okay, we'll just wait. You know.
Yeah, and there's you brought up on one of your shows that there's so many games right now. So if you're a PC gamer and a PlayStation game's coming to PC, you'll just wait. Like I have so many games to play that just came out in January and February of 2025 that I'm not really like hungry to go play Spider-Man 2 or God of War Ragnarok right away, but I would want those on my PC for sure.
I'm inundated with games, and this is obviously a conversation I have with the audience a lot, but like what's funny is that because a lot of people look at my play, like my trophies, and be like, oh, you're playing a lot of old games. And I'm like, I'm always playing a lot of old games because I'm missing things on a constant basis. Like I have an enormous amount of shit to play. I do not care. Like it goes into my whole thing of like the year without a game, without not buying games, but where there are no game releases. It's like everyone could benefit from that, whether you think you could or couldn't. It's like everyone can benefit from that because there's just so much shit we're missing. And it makes me long for those days when I was running IGN PlayStation and it was like the PS3 or the Vita and you could play basically everything. And it's pretty crazy to think about that. You could at least know everything. You can know like these 3 games came out this week. This game came to PSN. There's nothing out this week. It's not possible anymore. And it sucks because I feel like I'm missing a lot of shit, but it is what it is.
Yeah, when we were working together, I do miss the days of knowing this is the game you're covering this month. There's not like 5 of these to consider. It's very obviously Borderlands 2. Like that's definitely the one that you need to be playing for the month and making content about, or it's definitely Dark Souls, you know? So now it's just like, here's 3 100-hour games and they're all coming out within a week of each other. It's just, it's a little much.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of content, which is, by the way, one of the things that I think kind of undid Game Pass as a mass market model is not, and this is something I said in a video recently too, was I think Game Pass was not only a good idea, but if I were there at the embryo of it at Microsoft, I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. Because it all makes sense. It's like, look what's happening with movies and TV and music. And then I think they got the requisite data where it's like, yeah, these games are too fucking big. We didn't really think this through. You don't get as much value as you think because you can only spend your time with so many of these products anyway, which I think stymied their entire growth model. I guess what I'm saying is that there's just too many. Game Pass can't withstand it, and certainly the a la carte market can't withstand all of these games. But it's up to the publishers to kind of figure that out and weed themselves out, I guess, because a lot of them are going to fail by virtue of the fact that there's just so many hours. It's not even, in other words, I think Microsoft looked at it as like a money situation, and I'm like, it's not the money, it's the time.
Yeah.
You know,
and it's not just gaming.
Right.
It's screen time.
Right.
You're competing with HBO and, Severance on Apple TV Plus and all of these other things, YouTube, any of the Last Stand shows that you might be watching.
Yeah,
all
TikTok,
of that
Twitter.
is competing for your time.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And Cromwell from Larian put that argument out there where it's like, we are at a saturation point, it seems. And the saturation point is how many hours in the day there are.
It's a bummer. I bring this data point up a lot, but so my audience is rolling their eyes, but it's like, it's crazy that there are fewer than 1,000 games on the NES, period. Like you couldn't know it. And I do. Like it's an impossible task to know and absorb everything. And so I think Microsoft is on to something with Game Pass. I just think they learned a tough lesson that it's like, actually what's holding people back is not money. It's time and inclination. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a group of people that are like, yes, this is very valuable, but I don't think most people are not buying or playing games because of the money. I just don't believe that because it's not that expensive.
If you
not.
were really smart. Yeah. If you were really smart with Game Pass, you would just subscribe to it, play the one game. And if nothing else is coming, you would just unsubscribe and then resubscribe in the fall when the next one came out. Now, I say that when Xbox has a pretty good slate where you wouldn't really need to unsubscribe. But I remember Gene said, I'm going to unsubscribe for right now because there's nothing coming right now. And that's just a smart thing to do as a consumer. So I don't think that's controversial to do at all.
No.
Sure, if there's nothing coming, that's for you. Yeah, save your $20 and reinvest it when you're ready to play again. But the whole model is based on people not doing that and not being a smart consumer. But with all the new laws that allow easy cancellation and such for everything, it does make that a more viable option.
Yeah, I do that with my own subscriptions. I always have Spotify and Amazon Prime because I order things from Amazon. And then, but otherwise I kind of rotate. Like I'll get HBO when The Last of Us comes back. And
yeah,
I'll get Peacock when Twisted Metal comes back and all the rest. So I totally encourage. And that's one of the great things about doing Patreon and doing podcasts is like we actually just have a cadence where it's like people come and go based on their interest, but there is always something there for you. And it's about the same length every week. But this is why I think Phil and Matt Booty and all these other guys aggressively pursued all of these different purchases, which was, again, I think they read it right, but it's kind of a misreading too, is like, okay, so we have this churn problem, which they definitely did, which is why the numbers were always flat. And it's like, so we got to just have something there constantly. And I'm like, I don't know that still kind of doesn't solve your problem, because I think people are just going to be into what they're into. And free to play obviously has eroded this an entirely great deal and all the rest. It's a fascinating thing to think about. But anything else on your mind? Like what's any industry news kind of striking you recently? It seems a little slow. The games are coming out, but there's not much to talk about. Like the Shuhei Yoshida stuff kind of dominated the last week.
Yeah. Good cat. I don't know. We kind of talked about the PlayStation and Xbox stuff. I mean, the NetEase news happened this week.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It seems like, it just seems like they have this massive success with Marvel Rivals, but I don't know enough about that one to really speak on it, if I'm being honest. It just seems like they're making structural changes. I guess general industry question, do you think we're going to see a slowdown in terms of layoffs?
Maybe, but just by virtue, I think, of there not really being very much more to cut without getting close to muscle and bone. Because I do think that if we believe that there are too many games, then there are too many people making too many games. So something needs to be done about that. But I think the winners and losers are going to be hard to predict, because Helldivers is a great example where it's like no one really thought Helldivers was going to be a big game by any stretch of the imagination. Sony certainly didn't, and they weren't treating it like that. But now Arrowhead has literally probably 10 years of runway to fuck around now. So like that's like where they can go and make something else with someone else or make their own game and do whatever they want to do. So I think when those kinds of successes happen, they inoculate certain companies and people from layoffs. But then I think the other side happens too, where something comes to market, it dies quickly. And so I just don't think that that's going to stop happening. Like the amount of what I would call like creative destruction of these entities blowing up and then reforming, I think will just happen over and over again until the investment money dries up. And that seems to be what's happening. And maybe when the investment money dries up, then the projects will become safer and then the layoffs will cease. So I don't think we might not, I love that. I don't love it, but that there's that layoff tracker. And I look at it pretty often and I'm like, I'm not sure the number will be as high as it was last year. But again, I just don't think there's enough fat to the layoffs now will be more meaningful. Like what happened at BioWare, for instance. Not that they put out a great game in Dragon Age. I don't care about it. I'm not playing it, but it's surprising that a studio of that caliber, in quotes, would basically be all but disassembled. And I think the only reason they didn't shut it down completely in some sense is because it's BioWare. And just like Mass Effect is this thing that's been in pre-production for years and all of the rest. So I hope not, man. I mean, I would love for people to survive, but I just think everyone's got to be a lot more surgical in how they're approaching the market. And I think that there's going to be like really glorious successes and really catastrophic failures continuing to happen. And there's so little middle ground. You know, Square Enix reminds us of that all the time with like nothing is satisfying to them, like no matter what.
Oh yeah, right.
So
massive success failed to meet sales expectations every single time.
Yeah, it's like okay, dude.
Yeah.
So yeah, but other than that, yeah, the labor issues in the industry are fascinating from multiple angles, not only from like job security, but just AI and redundancy.
How do you feel about AI?
I think it's inexorable and inevitable, but I am deeply concerned about like the stripping of humanity of like some of the last things that, in my opinion, matter or that differentiate us from math. Like the the creativity of seeing a blue sky and representing it through your lens, as opposed to a computer absorbing 10,000 pictures of a blue sky and then telling you what it thinks it is. It doesn't really know. And so, but I think fighting against it is like swimming upstream. It's just, you got to kind of learn to live with it and deal with it. And I think it's going to create a lot of displacement for a lot of, not only in games, but I think it's going to be absolutely destructive in a lot of things. We were talking on a recent podcast about oncology and like how that's like considered a bad idea to become an oncologist now, because so much of it is studying, x-rays and scans and all the rest. And it's like a computer can do this much better than you, and already is, and I think it's going to hit everyone in different ways. And how do you feel about
it? I'm curious about it. I did this. I installed like a mod where ChatGPT was inserted into the Matrix demo, and you could walk up to NPCs and just have conversations with them about anything. And if you offended them, they would walk away. So there's stuff like that was really intriguing to me. And somebody also did it with Elder Scrolls. I believe a fan made a mod like that. So stuff like that I think is sort of interesting. And like, could that be utilized in an interesting way? But then you bring into the forefront the voice actors who voice those characters. How are they compensated fairly? Does that contract live in perpetuity? And that's a big reason for the strikes with the voice actors. So it's about being responsible. But we saw recently, just like with the overall AI initiatives from the government, that the government's going for it no matter what. And then China came along and they're just like, hey, we did it for 1/10 the cost that you did it for. Here's I think it's called DeepSeek.
Yeah.
I don't remember. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the AI space. Interesting in that it's happening. It's coming whether you want it to or not. And, China's going to go all in on it. And if we don't figure out how to implement it safely and responsibly, then I think that we'll just be left in the dust. So it is coming. And like, no matter how you feel about it, like I'm not like a super fan of AI or anything like that, but I think it would behoove you to take a look at it and at least have an understanding of how it functions and what it could be utilized for, versus talking about how frustrating it is to see it replace art. Because I understand that emotional argument, but it doesn't change the reality that companies are going to look to utilize it to make money. And it's unfortunate, but it's the reality we live in.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's this idea that AI will eliminate, like, will become dangerous, sentient, dangerous to human survival. Yeah. And I'm like, no, I don't. I think that's probably possible, but I don't think it's going to turn. I don't think we're going to have like a Skynet or Cylon situation on our hands. What I'm worried about is the destruction of human flourishing. Like, it's a real.
I'm worried about AI slop.
Right, and like what the downstream effect of deep unemployment is on monetary systems and currency value, and like it's a deeper problem than the creativity, because I realize that there's a hypocrisy central to it, which is like, don't replace the artists, right? Don't replace the voice actors with computers. And it's like, you replaced us on the manufacturing line with computers, and you did away with our jobs with computers a long time ago. And it's like, I always think about how useful AI is to gather information, like just to be like, when did this happen? And give me some sources. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, but a researcher used to do that for you. Like, everyone participates in the destruction of these various jobs, no matter who you are, and everyone can be victimized by it. Like I was saying earlier, from like the highest paid oncologists to the factory worker that's going to be replaced by a robot. And that's what I worry about. There's something sad about the lack of human-made art and all of the rest, but there's something sadder about like an underpopulation of have-nots that would rival the size of any in human history. And that's what I worry about. So I didn't mean to get so philosophical about it, but that's where my mind is on AI.
No, it's a big topic too, because where are we going with it? Like, what's it going to become when AI puts all of these places out of a job, and then it needs to pull data for a new subject and nobody's writing about it anymore because AI put it out of a job? So it's like chicken and an egg almost, where I don't know what's going to happen, because it is having a drastic impact on definitely on search, because everybody gets that little AI blurb at the top. So you have your sources right there, nice and handy. No reason to go to the website.
Right.
And sometimes it gets it wrong, but more often than not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as someone who came up as a guide writer, I've especially noticed that, because I'm a heavy guide user. I love using guides and walkthroughs, and I loved writing them back in the day. And it's like, yeah, they are really pincering people out of these, like they're becoming these knowledge machines, as opposed to directing you in certain, this was the inexorable result of everything though. It's like, everything's just become simpler and easier and fed to you in simpler terms. It's a big philosophical, economic, societal issue. The artistic stuff seems almost secondary or tertiary, but it's what I'm most fascinated by. It's at the same time. So yeah, AI is going to be an interesting thing, and the displacement that I think that will cause will be sad too. The big thing though, Destin, is I think people don't, the average person doesn't give a fuck. Like, I truly believe the average person doesn't care who makes the movie or how it was made or who is acting in it and how everyone was paid.
That's true.
And part of me is like, how can't you care about that? But again, going back to the hypocrisy of it, is like, I get it. Why would you care? In some sense. So without that level of caring, I just think it's going to deteriorate pretty rapidly.
Do I get my ice cream cone at McDonald's faster? Yes, then great.
Right.
Like, is the service quicker? Are games made faster? Like, I think that's what an average consumer would likely be thinking about. I got the new Star Wars game faster. Great. They don't think about like the massive implications that it has internally for the industry. Everybody in the industry is looking at that and thinking about that. But when my grandma went to get me a video game for the holiday, do you think she's thinking about the ramifications of society when, the new Sonic the Hedgehog came out, I'm going to get this for my grandson? No, like she's not considering that.
No. And it would almost likely not even be within her realm of reason to consider it at all in any way,
and that's how most people are.
Right, exactly. And so I don't begrudge anyone that. At the same time, it's so funny because this brings up another idea of you saying getting a game done quicker, where I'm like, the last thing we need is you to get your game done quicker. Because that indicates to me that you need to make more. We need to get this game out now so we can move on to the next game and make more and more. And I'm like, we don't need more. We need more thoughtful. So in some sense, AI is contrary to what the industry actually yearns for, which I think is which is fewer releases of a higher quality. And
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know that Hiroki Totoki is thinking about that stuff.
No, I don't think I don't think so either.
Or Satya Nadella.
Because what they're thinking of is like, okay, we have the Star Wars game. We have a game X. It doesn't have to be a Star Wars game. And this would take 4 years. And here's the burn rate for the studio. Mm-hmm. But if we'd use these tools, it takes 2.5 years. Here's the burn rate for that. That's what they're thinking of. But what they're not thinking of is it's like, okay, so you get this game out on the market and now you're just flooding it even more, because now these guys are making games 40% quicker. So you're just cratering it in a different way. It reminds me a lot of the race to the bottom on mobile, where it's like no one really gave a fuck about what they were doing to the rhythms and cadences of the market because they were getting theirs. They weren't worried about who was next up. And that's going to be the same cascading effect, I think, when AI starts getting involved. Is like, as long as people get their game out quickly and they make money, they don't give a shit about the downstream effects of flooding the market. And I'm experiencing that now as I co-own a small indie developer. It's like, it's hard out there, man. You know?
Lilimo, right?
Yeah.
Lilimo, yeah.
And our biggest game has sold like 40,000 copies. Our smallest game has sold like 3,000. We don't really know. We think they're all pretty good. It's just a matter of like timing, getting pushed down the market, getting obscured by all this other shit. Sucks. But it is what it is.
Maybe you'll make that typing game. I'll be one of your customers.
Oh my God, dude. We talk about it all the time. I want to do a typing JRPG pretty bad, but that would be it's a really fun idea, but it would be such a stupid idea if you wanted to sell any copies.
Yeah.
But very much a vanity release. But anyway, Destin, I don't want to keep you for much longer. We've been going for a long time here. I want to just finish off by letting you talk a little bit about your content and where people can find you. But I also want to congratulate you again on going out on your own and taking that big leap and doing seemingly a great job with it and finding your audience. It's one of those things I can relate to. I know how hard it is. And, so I'm wishing you the best. You're welcome with us anytime. If you want to join us there's really no new releases out right now, but as they start to come out, we do our deep dive game discussions and all of that. We'd love to have you on any game that, you're playing. So we'll keep in touch on that. And so keep up the good work, my friend.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll let you know. As for where people can find me, you can find me patreon.com/SafeStatePlus. That's the Patreon that I'm working on. A lot of interviews over there. Trying to figure out how to do the news. I kind of just put that out because I'm sort of using it. I plan to use it more of just like as a website, really, because I have a lot of free members and I have paid members. So it's like offer the higher quality stuff. Anyway, check it out. Patreon.com/SafeStatePlus. And you can check me out on YouTube.com/@DestinL or the Destin channel.
Cool, man. Yeah, I was looking at your YouTube. You have a lot of followers on YouTube too. So you have a good springboard to like get your content out there. And I think there's a lot of assholes out there. I see the way people treat everyone on Twitter and all these other social media sites, but like I really know and I see that you have like a core group of like people that really care about you, like your content. This era of micro community, I think, is really powerful, that people like you and me can like make a living just speaking to a smaller group of people than we've ever really spoken to, because we're used to these platforms like IGN. But you realize if you can just narrow it down and find your true people, you can make a really nice little wedge of the internet for yourself. So it's been fun to watch you do that, and I'm wishing you the best for my corner. And let us know if you need anything.
Yeah, you gave me some advice. I reached out to you privately a long time ago, and you said something along the lines of, you have a voice, let people hear it. And I was like, yeah, maybe I won't get it perfect, but let's give this a shot. And I did, and I think I've done well for myself. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I think one of the things I try to remind people in my orbit is like the idea of control. It's something my dad really imbued in me as a kid, and it took me a long time to like wrap my head around it, but it was a good advice, which was like, there's just things you can't control. And it's most of what happens. So like you can't worry too much about it. So like you have to put your voice out there with the best quality that you can put your voice out there. In your case, the best videos, the best content, and then see where the cards lay, but know that you left it all out on the field. And if things don't work out, you can't control that because you controlled everything you could. And that's the best advice I can give to people. That's why we try to just be really consistent and thoughtful, because we know this won't last forever, and that we can't control the ebbs and flows of people's wants and desires. It's just a matter of trying to cater to them as they exist. So best of luck to you, Destin. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I'm glad that we finally got to sit down and talk, and I'll be on your show next month. So that'll be fun. And I guess we'll talk about Patreon or different stuff. I don't know, whatever you want. You'll decide.
It'll be fun.
My very best to your family as well. Congratulations on your burgeoning family. It's exciting. And
you got married.
I did,
by the way.
Yes,
yeah. Since we spoke last, I think you got married, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You have a pool now?
Yes, I have a pool. Yeah. It's been more
Both
of a headache than I could have.
Important moments.
No, that's basically it. I mean, I just wanted to buy a house in here in suburban Virginia and just hang out. I think you can probably relate to this, but all I ever wanted was just like a middle class lifestyle, like of just not I don't want much more than that, And so finding someone like Micah that's like very much in the lane with me, and she's a huge fucking nerd. And plays games. I always thought, this is funny, like I always wanted and you met a couple of people that I dated back in the day. Like I always wanted to date people that weren't like me. It's like, oh, you got to get something else in your life. The person who wants to go out, the person who's not in the games, and then it's like when I finally gave in to just being with someone who's like me and compliments me, worked out a lot better. So Destin, be well. Thank you again for your time, and thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of Sacred Symbols and Last Stand. Couldn't do without you. Patreon.com/laststandmedia, laststandmedia.store for merch. See you next time. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty.
My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.